Start.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
You ready?
Yep.
Ready? Okay. So this morning what I prepared and named my sermon, and the times that I've done this, it's funny how I will name a sermon, and oftentimes the sermon that comes out has nothing to do with what the name I pick ahead of time. So I'm still going to go with what I named it and let you know that and what my intentions are. And then I will spend a few minutes just telling you a little bit about who I am and where I come from, my background. So what I wanted to name my sermon this morning is What a Christian Looks Like. I want to go through, and I've got several individuals from the Bible that I want to pull out, the individuals that we're all familiar with some of the things about them, and to try to point a picture of what it means to be Christian. So going back and we got to meet earlier and talk a little bit. My name is Paul Ellsworth. I live in Festus, which is about 30 minutes south of St. Louis. Married, have a daughter who's 13. I have a little puppy, 7 months old, a German Shepherd puppy named Thorn, and he's just an amazing critter. I grew up in a small town, smaller than this one actually. We do have all dirt roads, and Nottinger, Missouri was the name. And I have known Pastor Dave. I don't know him as Pastor Dave. I know him as Dave because I've known him since we were kids. We wound up meeting when we were in high school. I was on the Missouri's Conference Council on Youth Ministries, which was it's just an extension of UMYF at the conference level. And he was on the West Conference Council of Youth Ministries. And back when they were merging the two, they got the two groups together, and we met in Columbia, Missouri. In 1986 or 7. A few years later, we found each other going to college in the same place, and we were roommates through college. And then he went off to Texas to do football for a while, and lost track of him there. I think they take that football pretty serious down there. And then he moved back up here, and we got back in touch, and have stayed in touch ever since. So I've known him for a long time. I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy. I work on a master's program in education, and I've also spent time in seminary at Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis. Some of the interesting adventures I've had when I was a younger man, I lived for over a year in Leningrad or St. Petersburg, Russia. I taught English and business there, and that was a watershed moment for a little boy from a little town in Missouri to go off into the world and go into the big bad communist Russia and not speak the language. I think I literally knew yes and no when I got off the plane. I got hung up on the word hello. Even with my little language program, I couldn't figure out how to pronounce it, and so I landed with yes and no. It was a great experience for me, though. It's amazing what you learn about communication when you're in an environment where you're literally a deaf mute. I mean, I couldn't hear and understand anything they said, and I couldn't speak to them anything they could understand. But you can do so much with simply a finger and the words yes and no. I'd been there 3 or 4 days, and I saw a Dr. Pepper and a Snickers bar. And oh my Lord, it was amazing. I had to have those. So literally the way I got them was nyet, 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 da, nyet, 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 da. And it worked. You know, I got my Snickers and I got my Dr. Pepper. So I have a daughter that plays a lot of softball. Probably some people would argue more than probably what she should. But that little girl has learned so many lessons by doing that, both in how to deal with people and adversity. And at the age of 13, I will argue that she knows more about going in and doing a job interview than most adults do. The times I've seen her walk out on a field full of complete strangers and get on a pitching mound and pitch for a tryout scares me more than it does her. I will tell you that. So moving forward on what a Christian looks like, I have one of my other friends that lives up in Michigan found out that I was filling in for Dave doing this, and she wrote me something about in regards to when I was in the searching process of what to focus on. So I like the quote she had as a lead-in, so I'm going to read that. It says, "It seems too often many Christians forget that there is a growth process, and Jesus works on us each individually and gives us steps as we grow. Too many Christians judge, and a Christian is not perfect, but should try to be as Jesus is. Instead of accepting and helping others, many Christians push people away by their talk, so we often forget about grace. So I like that quote. There's a little bit there in the middle where it doesn't flow, it's not perfect, but it reminds us that we're all on a path, we're all growing from somewhere, and we all came from somewhere. I don't know that I believe I personally will ever get to that end in this life. I think it's a constant growth, and you can't get to the 13th rung of the ladder until you go through the first 12. And I think it's that way, and that's the same thing with reading the Bible. I've read the Bible several times, cover to cover, and every time, irregardless of regular study, I love going through it, starting in Genesis and finishing all the way through Revelations, and for me personally, struggling through the latter prophets. And when you get from Isaiah all the way on, and some of this stuff is really difficult to stick to and stay with, but there's so many things that I get out of doing that, and each time I go through it, it's something new I get out of it, and I relate that to there's certain things I have to understand before God can bring to my consciousness the next steps that I need to take. And there's so many examples of that in life too. When you look at a child, they crawl before they walk before they run, and I think the Christian faith is the same way. We each take those steps. So what I wanted to do this morning is take a look at several individuals that we find throughout the Bible and paint a picture of what a Christian looks like through those. Now, a lot of these we wouldn't actually classify as a Christian because of the time period when they lived and what they did. So they're the Jewish faith. They were Jews, but we see them as a picture of the Christian and we accept them as a part of our faith. The ones I have in particular that I want to discuss this morning are Moses. I want to take a look at him and some of the things he did. I want to look at King David. I want to look at Peter. Some of the things Peter's a lot of fun because Peter made a lot of mistakes. Peter gives me a lot of courage and belief that I have a chance. The Apostle Paul, and then the last one I want to take a look at, and we don't know a lot about him, but he's only mentioned in a few sentences, and that is Barabbas. We all know of Barabbas. We don't know a lot about him, but I want to use him as an example of how to paint, for me, what the picture of a Christian is. So we start with Moses, and as far as the scripture readings for this, I've got several different things I'm going to pull out as I go along, I think, and read through those, and I'll try not to pull out so many that it takes a long time, but different ones. We all know the story of Moses. We know how he was born in Egypt at a time period when the Egyptians were enslaved by the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh was concerned that their population was growing too much, so he had an edict that all the male children should be killed. And Moses was a child born during that time period, and his family had him put in a basket, and we all know the story of how he was in the water, and the Pharaoh's daughter found him, or one of her servants found him. Just happened to be Moses' sister that was there and said, hey, I'll go find somebody to be a nursemaid for this child. And Pharaoh's daughter says, yeah. And it just turns out that Moses' mom got to be his nursemaid. One of the interesting parts about Moses is the name Moses itself. It actually means I plucked you out of the water, which is kind of fitting for his whole beginning and that sort of thing. At least that's what the information I have on what the meaning of that name is. So we know that Moses is given credit for writing the first 5 books of the Bible. He's the one that brought the tablets down from Mount Sinai. He's the only person I know throughout the biblical history or otherwise that spent so much time in the presence of God that when he came down from the mountain, he was glowing. That's pretty cool. We talk about in our society about a woman when she's pregnant having a glow, but here's a man that spent so much time so close to God that he had a radiance and he glowed, and it was noticeable to the people. So Moses was very close to God. Moses got to see God do many works through him. I can't imagine going out in the field. I do a lot of hunting and fishing. I can't imagine going out in the field and coming to a bush that talks to me. That would probably freak me out just a little bit. He had that experience. All the miracles that he performed for Pharaoh, to try to get Pharaoh to let the people go, and that whole process God went through with him, the hardening of his hearts. Crossing the Red Sea. Now let's be honest here. If I walk to the water and I raise my arms up and the sea parts and I can walk across it, I'm going to be pretty flabbergasted. I think, personally, I like to think, and maybe I'm wrong because I've not been in that situation, if I ever went through that and ever saw God part water so I could walk across it, I think I'd have a hard time doubting it. I think after something like that, I'd have a pretty strong faith. Yet we see Moses makes mistakes too. One of the scriptures I have pulled up is Exodus 2:11 through 15. And I have it here, and I use the CEV. It reads, this verse reads very similar in different translations, but this was before he talked with God in the bush. This is when he was a young Egyptian, before he left Egypt. It says, when Moses went out the next day, he saw two Hebrew men fighting with each other. Moses said to the one who started the fight, "Why are you abusing your fellow Hebrew?" He replied, "Who made you a boss or judge over us? Are you planning to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid, and he realized they obviously know what I have done. When Pharaoh heard about it, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses ran away from Pharaoh and settled down in the land of Midian. And one day Moses, and then it stops there at that. But the point of bringing this up isn't to bash on Moses. The point of bringing this up is that Moses was a fallible human. He made mistakes. And in a fit of anger, Moses killed a man. And yet he's considered one of the greatest leaders in the Christian faith. There was another incident with Moses and faith. Numbers chapter 20 verses 6 through 13. And that's let's see, I can go actually read that. I may not read all of these just for a matter of time, but if I can pull it up really quickly. I can do it a lot quicker on here than I can in my Bible, so I'll pull it up here. So Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the meeting tent. Oh wait, am I in the right place here? Verse 20. And fell on their faces. The Lord's glory appeared to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, You and Aaron your brother, take the staff and assemble the community in their presence. Tell the rock to provide you water. You will produce water from the rock for them and allow the community and their animals to drink. So Moses, as we know, Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence as the Lord had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, Listen, you rebels, should we produce water from the rock for you? Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. Out flooded water so that the community and their animals could drink. So, the first reading that, it doesn't sound like Moses did anything wrong. But we find out later that it greatly angered God because of his lack of faith. And because of his anger and because of the striking of the rock instead of doing what God told him, Moses' punishment was that he was never allowed to see he was never allowed to enter into the promised land. And Moses was allowed to see the promised land. When they got to the River Jordan, God took Moses up the mountain and he showed him, here's all the promised land, but because of your lack of faith and because of your anger, you're not allowed to go there. And then God took him into a valley, and he's the only person I know of or can think of in the Bible that God actually buried himself. It says God took him there and buried him, and we don't know, other than that valley, we don't know exactly where Moses is buried. He basically went up the mountain, and that was his thing. So here's Moses, one of the greater individuals through the history of Christian faith, and we find that he had a lack of faith, and he angered God, and he killed a man. So he wasn't perfect. Talking about King David, and David is an amazing person, and just the stories of David from when he was a child all the way through his adulthood and the things he'd done. He was a poet, he was a warrior, he was a musician, he was a shepherd, he was a king, he was a theologian, he was a sinner, all those things wrapped up into one. The Bible calls him a man after God's own heart. How many of us in the Christian faith don't have a desire to be known as or be thought of as someone after God's own heart? I mean, That's one of the most amazing compliments in biblical reference that I know of. So this was somebody who was loved by God. He was somebody who loved God in return. And we look at, if we were to pull up and look at Psalms 51, and I have too many of these references to go through all of them in the time frame that we have. But Psalms 51, I think, reveals more than anything why David was called a man of God's own heart. So I guess I'm not going to go through that right now in this lesson. We'll leave that as homework, I guess, later for you to go through and look up Psalms 51. And I do believe it's a great example of why David was called a man after God's own heart. However, David also had iniquities and things where he was not very perfect. He's done things that we consider atrocious today. We look in 2 Samuel 11, tells the story of David lusting after Bathsheba. I mean, here's the king walking around on his roof and he sees some cute girl. He's like, and lust gets the best of it. Not only does he conceive a child with this lady out of wedlock, he specifically and purposely has her husband put on the front lines to be killed. The first thing he does is he tries to get the husband to come home and have sex with his wife so they can cover up the fact of what they did. And the husband is so respectful of what's going on with the battle that he won't do it. So as a result, his reward for being a respectful, honorable general or military guy in that campaign is that he gets sent out on the front line specifically to be killed. As we know, the punishment for that was that God took that child. And Bathsheba and David were married. They became a couple. And on the day of the death of that child, David goes to Bathsheba to console her, comfort her for the loss of that child. And that is the day that King Solomon was conceived. And as we know, King Solomon, through David, that is the genealogy or the lineage that Christ come from. And I point that out because I think it's important for us to realize that perfection in Christians is not something that we get even from the top. You know, there's fallibility in everything. It's not through our perfection or our works or our great gifts that we achieve anything great on this earth. It's God working through us. And I hope, if nothing else, the examples I bring out today is examples of great people that were fallible and made mistakes, and God was able to do great things through them in spite of all that. So, and Solomon was someone that God loved. In 2 Samuel 12, it says the Lord loved him and sent word by the prophet Nathan to name him Jedediah, and that stands for because of the Lord's grace. Now, I never knew King Solomon. That was something I knew going through this for myself. As many times as I've been through this, I didn't know that the Lord had sent Nathan to say that King Solomon should be named Jedediah. That was something I learned in this process myself. So that's as many times as I've been through that story, I still learned something new. Not that I didn't learn it before, I just didn't remember it, so it stuck out to me. So that was pretty interesting. So we have someone who is called a man after God's own heart, that did all the great things that he did, and yet he made some very atrocious mistakes and sins too. And that brings me to Peter, and Peter is somebody I could probably talk on until Tuesday. You guys probably have lives and you want to leave, and I know the guys over at the other church will want me to show up there sometime today as well, so I won't. But Peter's a great character because he sticks his foot in his mouth. It seems like every time he opens his mouth, he says the exact wrong thing. So I get a lot of encouragement out of Peter being who Peter was, because I can completely mess up, and I'm in great company. So a couple of things I want to point out about Peter. John 1:42 is where he meets Jesus, and Jesus names him. He says, Simon the son of John, you're going to be named Peter. Now in Aramaic that is Cephas. In the Greek it is Petros. But it comes out, both of those come out to meaning Peter. And both of the word Peter in both languages ultimately means stone or rock. And the significance of that was that here was Christ establishing him as the cornerstone of the church. He's the bedrock, the foundation. This is who I'm going to build the church on. oh my Lord, Peter, all the things. So Peter is blessed in that for about 3 years, we don't know exactly the time frame, so about 3 years, Peter hangs out with Christ. And they're on the road, they're preaching, they're traveling, they're camping. I mean, from what I understand, this time period in history, they're sleeping out under the stars. And of course, there's times where they sleep inside. But they're living in a very close, intimate situation for about 3 years. You can imagine going on a 3-year hike with a buddy across the country. That's kind of the relationship they had for 3 years. All right, so some of the other things. So in Matthew 14:22 is where they're out in the boat early in the morning, and Christ comes walking out on the water to them, and they see him, and Peter says, "Lord, if that's you, command me to come out to you." And Jesus says, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat and walks on water. Come on. I've been in a boat. If some guy comes walking out in the water to me in a boat and says, "Get out of the boat," and I jump out of the boat and I can stand on water, can you imagine what that would do for your faith? How strong would my faith be if I actually stood on water because some guy told me to get out? I mean, we realize the guy is Christ. I don't mean to belittle that. But if somebody tells me to come out of the boat and stand on water, am I not going to believe in that guy? So he had that experience. I didn't have that experience. You know, I struggle with my faith from time to time. I didn't have the experience of walking on water. Peter did. Big wave comes up, and he loses faith, and he falls, and he says, "Jesus saved me." He reaches down, and he grabs it. You know, so here's a guy walking on water, a little wave. Come on, a little wave destroys his faith. So, you know, one of the other things that Christ and Peter share together, I believe, is Leviticus. Not Leviticus. It starts with an L. Lazarus. So they get word that Lazarus has died, and it's hot, and it takes several days for him to get there. They get there, and here's a guy who, he's not just not breathing anymore, he's starting to smell. And this guy's dead. He's starting to smell. And Peter sees Christ bring him back to life. I mean, how can that not build your faith and solidify it? Right? I mean, I'm thinking, man, if I walked on water and I saw a legitimate, dead, rotten, stinking guy brought back to life, yet when Christ is taken in and tried, he tells Peter, "You're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter denies him 3 times. Loses faith. After all that, loses faith and denies him 3 times. It amazes me that. So that's Peter. And there's so many other things about Peter. I like Peter. He's great. If it wasn't for Peter, I don't think I would have faith in my ability to be a Christian. So, and we get to the Apostle Paul. He was one of the other ones. The Apostle Paul has written most of the New Testament. Traditionally from history, at least when I was growing up, he was attributed to have written 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. Now we know now through a lot of study and a lot of stuff, there's a lot of question as to whether he actually wrote all 13 of those. The reality is we don't know. We don't know. We have no positive records one way or another. We take that on faith. I think there's 7 of them that they say that they're 100% sure that he wrote. The other 6 are questionable because of the grammar and the language. It doesn't match, so it's questionable. But we don't know. So the Apostle Paul was, you know, we know the story of him on the road to Damascus. Before that, though, we find out that he was a Pharisee. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. So we can track his roots all the way back to the original tribe. His father was a Pharisee. We're told that. His father was also a Roman citizen, so he claims to have Roman citizenship also from his father. And some of the interesting things about Paul, as we know, is he's known as Saul early on. He was a Pharisee, and his whole life goal was that the persecution of Christians. I mean, he hunted them down. He had them arrested. We know that he held the coats for the guys that stoned Stephen. You know, so he was a great enemy to Christians. And even though he was that, God saw something in him was necessary, and Christ appears to him on the road to Damascus and changes his life. And still a pretty amazing story about how he was blinded, and yet he was sent in and asked to be touched and blessed by the guy that was scared to death of him. And that took a lot of faith on that part too. As one who actually wrote down most of what we see in the New Testament as our guide towards Christian faith, we see that he started out in life as someone who was persecuting Christians. And yet we see that God was able to use him to do, where would we be without the New Testament? It's amazing to me how God can use people from different walks of life and take anyone from any situation and put into use. And then the last one I want to talk about, and I think even though I share a name with Paul and I laughed hard at Peter, and we know very, very little about this. There's only a couple of sentences in the entire Bible about this guy, but he's someone I think I identify with more so than any of them, and that is Barabbas. And we know the story of Barabbas when Christ was captured and Pontius Pilate was going through the whole trial process. They had a custom where he would give the people release someone during the Passover, and they could choose anyone they want. And they had a choice between Christ Jesus and Barabbas. And what we know about Barabbas was he was a part of a riot or a rioter. I don't know that I've found any of the details of what that rioting was about, but he was a rioter or part of a riot, and he was a murderer. Those are the only things we know about him from his past. We don't know anything about what happened after that I'm aware of. If it's out there, we may know something. I don't know anything more about it than that. So that's what I know about Barabbas. But a couple of interesting things about Barabbas is his name. His name Barabbas. We don't think about it, and I hadn't learned until I started going through this process a lot about his name and the meaning of his name. So it's not in the Bible that his first name was Jesus, but there's historical documentation and reference that his name was actually Jesus Barabbas. And if you take the name Barabbas and break it down, it comes from Bar Abba, and Bar Abba means the Son of the Father. So where we have Christ, the Son of the Father, is sacrificing himself for his sins. And the murderous beast, horrible person that gets turned loose instead of him, or chosen instead of him, his name is Jesus, the Son of the Father. The irony of that is not something I think that is to be missed. I think there's something there. So when I say I identify with Barabbas, I think that more so than the others, I am Barabbas. I am that person who was released and freed because of the death of Christ. Because in that moment, whether it was done in the same context of what we think of it, Christ purchased his freedom. I mean, by the choice of the Jewish people, Christ purchased his freedom. Christ also has purchased my freedom, and he's purchased all of our freedom. And so that whole thing there with the Paschal pardon is what that was called at the time, where they gave somebody that allowed to choose somebody. I hope in some way bringing these individuals out and bringing them to light. We, growing up through Sunday school, we hear the stories. We don't hear the sides of them that I brought out today. For my faith and for my ability to get up and walk every day and feel like I'm a Christian and try to look like a Christian, I need these stories. I need Moses to not be perfect. I need King David to have not been perfect. I need Peter for nothing else than the comic relief that he provides. One of the other very interesting things about Peter that I've enjoyed for years knowing is that Christ calls him in the New Testament, the writings, Christ calls him both Simon, he calls him Simon Peter, and he calls him Peter. And the one thing that is consistent is every time Christ calls him Simon, he messed up. Every single time he calls him Simon, it's because he did something wrong. Every time he calls him Peter, it's because he does something wonderful. So if you haven't noticed that before, when you go back and read through that, every time you see Simon, you go, oh, what did he do? was he in trouble for? So he actually goes through and does that. So that's an interesting thing. So that's what I have. That was my message this morning. It's just that perfection is not something that really is a part of the Christian life. So that's all I have.
Evelyn had first dibs on
Okay,
that.
that's fine.
Well, since we talked about gardens, I thought in the garden.
Okay. What number is that?
314.